Hey, if you have your Bibles, Luke chapter 12, we are excited. We're in a series called Spring Cleaning. Someone say, it's time to clean. It's time to clean. Turn to someone, time to clean. I had one lady come up. I actually talked to a gentleman this week. He said, Pastor, we were here last Sunday, and my wife turned to me and she said, I need to do a deep cleaning of the house. Statistics say you only do a deep cleaning of the house, like you actually get rid of junk, about once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe once every 2 or 3 years. Some of you are like, I'm on the decade plan. Listen, the subtitle of this series is Getting Rid of the Things That Hold Us Back. And here's the reality. We all have things in our life that we've been collecting, storing up, things we need to get rid of. But the problem is we keep holding on to them, and the things we're holding on to are actually holding us back. It's holding us back from what God wants to do in our life. And so we're looking at some of these things that in our life, in our heart, in our mind, in our words, in our actions, that are keeping us from God's best, that we need to let go of. And last week we talked about the wonderful issue of pride. Pride's one of those things that we can see in others, but not in ourselves. And we said this last week. You cannot be looking at Jesus and looking down on others at the same time. It's impossible. You can't be looking at him and looking down on others. Today's one of those other topics. It's just like pride. It's like, oh, I can see it in them. Pastor, I know this message is for the person in front of me. This message is for the person behind me, but this message ain't for me. Listen, this message is on greed. And most people think, I'm not greedy. I just need enough to get by. I just need enough to, take care of my needs. And so how do we clean out the greed? Because here's what I want you to understand about greed. Make sure you catch this before we even dive into Luke chapter 12. Greed comes in all shapes and sizes. Listen, in fact, what I'm about to read here in just a moment, Jesus himself is speaking, and Jesus says these words, get rid of every kind of greed. That means there's more than one kind of greed. Yes, the passage we're going to read in a moment, it talks about money, finances. But there's all kinds of types of ways to be greedy. Listen, if you complain more than you give thanks, you probably struggle with greed at some level. If you're more prone to pay attention and concerned about your cash flow or your financial status than you are your character or spiritual status, you might struggle with greed on some level. Listen to me. If you treat people differently based on their social and economic status, on some level you may struggle with greed. If you hurt people just so you can get ahead, if you hurt people verbally, in business, with your actions, with your words, you may struggle with some level of greed. In other words, greed has many shapes and sizes. The second thing about greed is the subtitle of this series. It's getting rid of it, which means greed has two arms. Greed has arm left, arm right, and here's what that simply means. Greed is wanting more, but greed is also refusing to let go. We believe, so many of us, that what I have is because of what I have done, and what I have belongs to me. We think everything we have is because of what we have done, and it belongs to me. And here's what happens. One of the fastest growing businesses in the last 10 to 15 years in America. Here it is. I'll show it to you. One of the fastest growing businesses, storage units, self-storage. Listen, we've got them even here in this community. Why? Because we don't have enough room for our stuff. So we have to have another storage locker, storage unit for our stuff. Why? Because we have too much stuff. And here's what happens. So many of us, and listen, make sure you catch this. This doesn't matter about your political affiliation. This doesn't even matter about your spiritual affiliation. Listen, this doesn't matter if you grew up in Danville or didn't grow up in Danville. This doesn't even matter about your economic status. Here's the deal. If you live in America, let me tell you, generally speaking, I'm talking generalization. Generally speaking, we love to collect stuff. We collect. And so here's what happens. We become containers. We contain, we store up, we build, we collect, and we never let go. And what happens is, here's the danger of greed. We become containers when God has given us stuff so that we would be conduits. We are collecting and storing and building up, and God has given you resources, whatever it might be, not just financial resources. God has entrusted you with your gifts, your talents, your abilities. God has entrusted you with your words so that you would be a conduit, so God can give it to you, so it can flow through you to get to the place where it needs to go. And so God didn't give it to us just for ourselves. And so we are containers when God's asking us to be conduits. So we're holding on. But here's the real lie. And if you have your handouts, write this down. And if you don't have your handout, write it down somewhere else. Use someone's hand. All right? Greed is a liar. And here's the lie of greed. Life would be more secure if I just had a little bit more. Life would be more secure. That word secure means more certain. More certainty. Do you know that it doesn't matter who you ask, age, it doesn't matter where they live in the world, the number one fear that always shows up on every survey, the number one fear of humanity is the fear of the unknown. Not knowing how something's going to play out. And so if I have enough stuff, if I have enough money, if I have enough finances, I'll be prepared for the unknown. My life will be more secure, more certain, more confident, more assured. And so here's the question. Listen, you know this. It doesn't matter the season of life. Now, throughout your seasons of life, what you want more of has changed. Listen, when I was in 5th grade, I went with my first, quote, girlfriend. You remember at 1980s when you wanted to go with someone, you would send them a note, give it to their friend, so their friend would give it to the person you liked because you were too shy to talk to the person you liked. So you wrote them a note, do you want to go with me? Yes, no, maybe so. And so I went with this girl named Misty. That was her real name, Misty. It wasn't a nickname. And so Misty's dad, Nicholas, owned a restaurant in Lynchburg. Do you know why I wanted to stay with Misty? Because her dad had the greatest shrimp in all of Lynchburg. All I cared about was shrimp. Listen, after about 2 weeks, I didn't care about Misty. But I didn't want Misty to leave me. Why? Because I wanted more shrimp. In 8th grade, you know what I wanted? I wanted more playing time on the basketball court. Listen, as you get older, I wanted more job opportunities. I wanted more salary. I wanted more promotion. Here's the deal. What we want more of is constantly evolving, changing. But you know what never changes? The fact that we want more of something. We want more. Why? Because if I have more, my life will be secure. And so as we dive into Luke chapter 12, here are the questions I want to dive into. What do you want more of? But here are the more important questions. Here are the more important questions. Why do you want it? And what are you willing to do to get it? What do you want more of? But why do you want it? Your purpose and your motive. And what are you willing to do to get it? Some of you have read a novel, probably, by one of the most famous authors in all of history. The most famous, one of the most famous authors is a guy named James Patterson. He's written all kinds of books, all kinds of fiction books. Well, about 10 to 15 years ago, he wrote a nonfiction book called The Day America Told the Truth. And he surveyed more than 10,000 Americans. And he asked them one question. And the question was this: what would you be willing to do for $10 million? What would you be willing to do for? And the answers were crazy. In fact, you'll see some of the answers. 25% said they would abandon their family. 25% said they would abandon their faith. 23% would be a prostitute for a week. 10% would withhold evidence of a murder. 7% would commit the murder. And 3% would give their kids up for adoption. Some of y'all are thinking, Pastor, you catch me on the right day. I'll give you $10. I'll pay you to take my kids off my hands. Here's the deal. We all have something that we're passionate about, that we truly, deeply desire. And the question is this: what would you be willing to do to get what you really want? And what is it that you think that you need? In the story that we're going to read, Jesus is teaching a crowd of people, and he's teaching them on hypocrisy. Jesus is talking to a group of people who say they love Jesus with their lips, but their heart and their actions say otherwise. They have false motives. They're impure. They do it for own personal gain, own personal benefit. And so Jesus is teaching a large crowd. And in the middle of teaching, this guy comes out of nowhere and he interrupts. There is a man who is willing to interrupt Jesus' teaching to get what he wants. Now, if you were here last week, we said anytime you see Jesus teaching people, the very first question you must stop what you're reading and just ask yourself, who is Jesus speaking to? Who's his audience? So Jesus is teaching to a crowd, but he's going to have a one-on-one conversation with a man, and you're going to see this. This man is not happy with what he has. This man is angry and frustrated and upset at his brother because he thinks his brother got a larger inheritance than he did. So he's upset. He doesn't come to Jesus seeking Jesus' presence. He doesn't come to Jesus in worship and prayer. He doesn't come to Jesus in adoration. He comes to Jesus so Jesus will validate his feelings. He comes to Jesus so Jesus will fix a problem when what Jesus really wants to do is fix his heart. And what you're about to see is this. You're going to see that it is possible. It is possible to be successful. It's possible to be productive. It's possible to be wealthy. It's possible to think you've got it going on and be a fool at the same time. And Jesus is going to show us how to do this. In Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 13, it says this. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware!" Exclamation point. He wants to get your attention. Beware! Guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. Then he told him a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops, and he said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have enough room for all my crops." And then he said this, "I know. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and all my other goods. And I'll sit back and I'll say to myself, my friend," don't you like people who talk about themselves that way? "My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." Jesus is talking to a man who's upset. He's frustrated. I don't have enough. How can I take care of it? I don't want to let go of it. I'm going to hoard it. Listen, Jesus is not, make sure you hear me, Jesus is not speaking against saving. Jesus has many biblical principles of saving, of the future, of planning. He's not speaking against that. Jesus is speaking against hoarding, because hoarding is selfish. Hoarding is something for ourselves and ourselves only. And so Jesus says, beware. Many of you have seen signs that say beware of whatever. Beware of dogs, beware of trespassers, beware of deer crossing. I was talking to a guy on the worship team the other day who hit a black bear on 29. I've never seen a sign that says beware of black bear. I've seen deer crossing. I've seen horse crossing. I've seen children crossing. I ain't never seen a black bear crossing. But beware. Why do you have a sign that says beware? It's real simple. Because it's a warning. Warning, warning, warning. If you don't pay attention, you're headed for danger. And so Jesus says, how do you know? How do you know if greed is your leader? Now remember, when it comes to actual money, money is not a sin. Money is not evil. Money is not godly or ungodly. Every dollar you have is neutral. Every dollar you have is neutral. The question is, who is the master of your money? Who owns it? And so Jesus is giving us 3 warning signs of what happens when greed is your leader. And the first thing he says is this: greed will never satisfy you. Greed will never be enough. You'll always be looking for more. This man came to him and said, Jesus, tell this my brother to divide, give me more. He's got his share of the inheritance is larger than mine. It wasn't enough. And then think about it. Jesus told the story of a man, in the story, this man, because of his crops and his produce, because of the wheat, he tells the story of a man who has perpetual income. He never has to worry about his income. It's not going to stop. It continues to flow. But he needs a bigger barn. I don't have enough barn. And then he says, I don't have enough barns. So my barn's not big enough, and I need more, and it just never ends. And this is the question. Listen, every one of us, regardless of our financial status, and financial status is that's the example Jesus is using in this passage. Listen, every one of us, right now in the world's economy system, the world's economy system says that the poverty level is right around $15,000. That's the poverty level. And so here's the deal. If someone has a part-time job and they make $15,000 a year, you know what they think to themselves? They think, man, if I just had $30,000, if I could just double that 15, I would be so happy and so secure, and I'd be able to set myself up for the future. And someone who makes $50,000 a year, you know what they think? Man, if I could just double that to $100,000. If I could just make six figures, do you know how awesome life would be? I'd be able to set everything in my life up for success and for the future. The person who makes six figures, 100 grand, you make $100,000, you know what you think? Man, if I could just double that to 200 grand. If I could just work to 200, man, I'd be so happy. I'd be so happy. I'd be so productive. I'd be so certain. And then the person who makes 200, 250, 500K a year, man, if I could just double that to 500K, if I could just make my first million, do you know how happy I would be? And look what Scripture says in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. How meaningless to think that wealth, listen, if wealth is your goal, if money is your goal, you will never be satisfied. Listen, some of you parents, you know you got your teenage son or daughter, or you got your 20-something son, and you remember the first time about 12, 15 years ago, they were so excited to buy the most popular video game system of all time, the PS2, the PlayStation 2. And they got it, and they played it, and they kept it, and they loved it. And then the PS4 came out, and they got that. And then they got the PlayStation 5, and then they got the Nintendo Wii, and then they got Wii Sports, and then they got the Nintendo Switch. And now they got a big circle on June 5th, 2025. Why? Because that's when the Nintendo Switch 2 comes out. They keep all their stuff, and then they just keep collecting more. Why? Because it's not enough. And some of you are thinking, Pastor Scott, I don't care about video games. I know you don't, but how about your shoes? Some of you are like, oh, now you're stepping on my toes. So, listen, it may not be shoes. Listen, I know it's just an example. I'm going to tell you in a minute. Remember, he's not against all that stuff, okay? He's not against it. It's about what we do with it and the purpose behind it. The question is this. When it comes to money, when's it enough? When do you just simply say, God, thank you? And this man had perpetual sources, but still, it wasn't enough. And I'll tell you this. Some of the signs of greed is this. When your constant emotions are fear, you have fear of losing. I don't want to lose what I've collected. I don't want to lose what I have put away. And so I have this fear. When fear is your overwhelming emotion of losing what you have, or your overwhelming emotion is anxiety of not having what you think you need. When your overwhelming emotions are fear and anxiety, greed may be leading you because you never are satisfied. Jesus says, beware. He says, beware of greed because of a second reason. He says, because it's only temporary. You can't keep it. You can't take it with you. It never satisfies, and it's only temporary. It's here today. It's gone tomorrow. In this story, Jesus says, you will die this very night. And then he asks a question. Jesus says, here's the question. He says, then who will get everything you worked for? The man who was working had no family, no heritage, no legacy, no one to pass it on to. When I was a college student in the mid-'90s, in my early ministry years as a youth pastor in the mid to late '90s, those of you who go to church here, you know this. I'm a big sports guy, and so most of my T-shirts were all sports-related. And there was a sports company called No Fear T-shirts, and they were mostly sports-related, mostly. And there was a T-shirt, and I had them all. T-shirt came out and said, if you can't win, don't play. No fear. Another one came out, it was about baseball. It said, bottom of the ninth, bases loaded, 2 outs, down by 3, no fear. You're up to bat, you're ready to hit a grand slam. There was a basketball one. It said 5 seconds left, down by 2, standing at the 3-point line, no fear. I had that one. But my favorite one wasn't even sports related. It wasn't even a Christian company that I was aware of. It had nothing to do with sports, kind of. And here's the T-shirt, and I had it. And the T-shirt said this. It said, he who dies with the most toys still dies. He who dies with the most toys still dies. You lose it all. You don't have it. It's gone. It's here today, and then it's gone tomorrow. There's been a story that's been passed down through the ages. The first time I heard it was about a Scottish man, Old Man Tom. Old Man Tom worked his whole life to accumulate land and property and value and wealth at the expense of losing his family. He abandoned his family, that question that James Patterson asked. And at his funeral, all of the old Scottish businessmen were standing there, and one man asked the question, how much did Old Man Tom leave behind? And another man stood there, and he gave a 3-word answer. All of it. How much did he leave behind? He left behind all of it. He didn't have any of it. It wasn't. Jesus says, what will happen when you're gone? And make sure you hear this. This man said, make sure you hear this. This man said, now I finally have enough. Eat, drink, and be merry. Eat, drink, and be merry. Now make sure you hear this. All right? Eat, drink, and be merry. Make sure you listen to the whole statement. Eat, drink, and be merry is a great philosophy to live by. It really is. It's a great philosophy to live by. If this life is all there is. If this life is it. Now, for those of us who claim to be followers of Jesus, for those of us who say we're Christians, that means you believe that this life is not all there is. That means we sing the song, and we'll sing more songs. Listen, that when we take our last breath, we are raised to life with Christ. We are raised to life with Christ. And if you believe that one day you will be raised to life with Christ, then that means at some point, you have to live beyond now, beyond the temporary. I went on my first mission trip. When I was in 6th grade. I grew up in Lynchburg, went to Thomas Road Baptist Church, and as a 6th grader, I got on a charter bus on a Thursday morning, and we drove 38 hours to Mexico. We were stupid. It's amazing we didn't kill each other. Some of you can't be in a car for 2 hours without wanting to kill somebody. Listen, you know what I'm talking about. We went, and the first thing we did when we got there is we exchanged our U.S. dollars into pesos. And we got pesos, and I bought a chess set. I didn't know how to play chess as a 12-year-old, and guess what? As a 52-year-old, I still don't know how to play chess. But it sure is a nice chessboard. And guess what I came home with as a 6th grader? As a souvenir, I came home with a chessboard and leftover pesos. But guess what? I went to the arcade, and the arcade wouldn't let me play video games with those pesos. What's wrong with them? I couldn't buy that. And so what happened is that then I started going on other mission trips. And I went to Brazil, and I went to Guatemala, and I went to Israel, and I went to Kenya last summer. In Kenya, they have shillings. In Israel, they have shekels. In Guatemala, they have the quetzal. And here's the deal. I would always bring money back from those short-term mission trips. But do you know that the shilling and that the shekel, do you believe this? Outback won't let me use them there. I'm telling you what, over in there, it was like $1,000 over there, but over here it's worth about $3. I tried to convince them it'll be okay. They didn't believe me. Why? Because it's only good while I'm there. You see the verse on the screen from 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7. It says, after all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. We brought nothing in. We can't take anything with us. Listen to me. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, make the connection here. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ and you believe you will be raised to life after this life, then every single day you wake up and take another breath, you are here on this earth as a short-term mission trip. Why? Because you're headed to a different kingdom. And you have a different king, and you live for a different purpose. And so the question is, everything that God has enriched you and trusted you with, are you using it that will only last here and now, or are you going to be a conduit to help other people also experience the kingdom where you're headed? It'll never satisfy. It's only temporary. And number 3, beware of greed is this: it's always destructive. It's always destructive. Listen, Jesus says, "You fool, you will die this very night." Here's a man who did not stop working, and work caused his demise. It ended up in his own death. I told you last week that there's a pastor out in Southern California named Eric Geiger who's been very helpful in the putting together of this series. And he told the story about an author named Leo Tolstoy. Many of you have heard of Tolstoy. He wrote all kinds of novels, but he wrote a short book called How Much Land Does a Man Need? And in that book, he was talking about a guy who I think lived over in the India region. And he's living there, and all he wanted was more land for his, listen, good reason, for my family, for my heritage, for my legacy. And he couldn't get more land. He wanted as much land as he could. And so one day he saw an ad, and there was a man who was selling off millions of acres of land that he owned. And he said this: for 1,000 rupees, 1,000 rupees is basically about 12 US dollars. 1,000 rupees, 12 US dollars. He said, if you show up at my house right before sunup, get your marker, get your roller, get your string, and as much area of land as you can mark off from sunup to sundown will become yours. And this man thought, this is too good to be true. He showed up, he gave his money, and they said, go for it. He said, the only stipulation is this: by the time the sun goes down, you have to be back at the starting point. So he starts off, and he's marking, and he's running, and he is hustling, and he's not stopping. He takes no breaks all day, 12 hours, sun up to sundown, no meals, no restroom breaks. He just goes and goes and goes, and he starts to see the sun descend. And as he sees the sun slowly start to go down, he starts booking it back to the starting point because he's way out. He's marked off tons of land, and he gets back to the starting point about a minute before the sun descends. He makes it back. And as soon as the sun descends, he keels over. And he dies. And they rule his death by exhaustion. He just never stopped. And then a few days later, they're having the funeral, and they put this man in a 7-foot hole. And as the story goes, the end of the story is this: a man looks at his friend in a 7-foot hole and says, I guess we know how much land a man needs. That's it. He worked himself to exhaustion, to destruction, to his own death. You see there, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9. 1 Timothy 6:9 says this: but people who long to be rich fall into temptation. They are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. Those who long to be rich fall into a temptation, and they're trapped. And it leads to ruin and destruction. I don't have to tell some of you in this room, because I've gone with some of you through some of your stories and your journeys. You've seen how money has destroyed family relationships. You've seen how it's caused division, conflict, fights. You've seen how the love of money has caused people to lose jobs. It's broken up marriages and relationships. In fact, verse 10, I didn't give you verse 10 of 1 Timothy 6. Here's a paraphrase of it. It says, those who love money are prone to wander from the faith. I gave you that statistic at the beginning. What would you be willing to do for $10 million? 25% said they'd be willing to abandon their faith. I don't know about you, but I can tell you from personal experience, I've seen a lot of people abandon their faith for a lot less than $10 million because they just didn't have enough. And so Jesus says, beware. When greed is your leader, you will be overcome by fear, by anxiety, by isolation, and by division, and by destruction to your own soul. But fortunately, there's good news. So let me give you the good news. The title of this message is called Getting Rid of Greed. So how do we get rid of it? 2 places to start. Number 1, here's where we start. We have to learn to be content. We have to learn to be content. Jesus says in verse 15 of Luke chapter 12, here's what he says. He says, life is not measured by how much you own. Life is not measured by how much you own. Jesus is insinuating, here's what Jesus is saying. There's more to life than what you can hold. There's more to life than just stuff. He's not against your stuff. He's not against your stuff. He's not against you having stuff. He's against your stuff having you. He's against you being controlled and consumed by it. And so Jesus is saying life's not measured by what we can see and by what you possess. So Jesus is insinuating life is about so much more than what we can see. And what can't we see? What we can't see is what's in here. So how do you learn to be content? Content is an inner peace, joy, and strength that is perpetual because of who and what you already have. Contentment is inner joy, peace, and strength because of who and what you already have. Look what Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 6. He says, yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. So if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Who gives you what you need for your enjoyment? God. And so Paul says, true godliness with contentment cannot be measured, is great wealth. In fact, he goes on to say a few verses later, he says, teach those who have a lot of money not to put their trust in money because it's so unreliable. Here today, gone tomorrow. But put their trust in God. Look what he says in Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13 says, don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have. For God said, I will never fail you and I will never abandon you. Here's what Paul is saying in 1 Timothy and Hebrews. He says, contentment is appreciating and enjoying who you have. And God said, you always have me. I will never fail you. I will never leave you. It is enjoying and appreciating who and what God has already given you. He's given you His grace and His mercy and His love and His forgiveness and His salvation. When you have Jesus, you already have a priceless treasure. And then he says, Paul says it, you want to know how to be content? Trust that God knows what you need. Now, next week, we're going to talk about what happens when you think other people have what you deserve. We're going to talk about that next week, when other people have what you deserve. But here's how you learn to be content. I trust that God knows what I can handle. So He will provide me what I need for my enjoyment. He's given me His presence, and He's given me His salvation. And so I will be content with who I have, Jesus. I will be content with what I have, His presence and His salvation. That's how I learn to be content and fight the temptation for greed. And then the second thing, and this is the big thing, you have to live with generosity. The antidote to greed is generosity. There's no other way to get around it. And listen, if you want, I would encourage you to do this. You can put in parentheses beside the word generosity in your notes, for those of you taking notes. You can write the word aggressive. Live with aggressive generosity, intentional generosity. Why? Because it doesn't come natural. You've got to work at it. And what does Jesus do at the end of Luke chapter 12? Jesus says in verse 21, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. At the end of the story, do you know what Jesus does? Jesus invites you and me into His story. He invites us to be rich in our relationship towards God by being rich in our relationship with others. We don't hoard it, but we use it. We bless others with it. Why? Because Matthew 6, if you grew up in church, you know Matthew 6. Matthew 6 says this, where your treasure is, there will your what? Your heart be also. Where your treasure, you know what that means? Treasure is your investment. Where you give towards. Listen, yes, financially, but where you give your time. Whatever you invest in, make sure you catch this. Whatever you invest in, that's where your interest is. That's where your heart, your passion, your commitment, your love. Listen, how many of you ever had a kid who played sports? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. How many of you ever had a girl who did cheerleading or dance? Raise your hand. I separated those from sports, by the way. I don't know if maybe they're the same. Maybe they're the same. Listen, you know, you didn't care about your little girl. Listen, you didn't care about dance recitals until your little girl did dance recitals. And then you realize, you know how much money those outfits cost? You're like, dear Lord, you know, maybe I do have to get a second job. Listen, you didn't care. You had no interest until there was an investment. Listen, some of you, you have the fortunate privilege because of how God has enriched your life. You have invested in different stocks. You didn't care about McDonald's and Amazon and Starbucks and Apple and Yahoo and Nike until you had investment there. Now you check them all. And listen, with all the love in my heart, listen to this from God's word. I'm talking to Dan River Church because that's where we are today. But the church in general, do you know why so few people have interest in what the church is doing? Why so few people have interest in a kids' water adventure or a student ministry summer camp at TRO or 7 people going to Kenya? Do you know why so few people have interest in that? Because so few people have investment in that. When you are generous and give, you begin to care. If you want to know about biblical generosity, go and read 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9. 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. Now, I'll tell you this. I picked out one verse from 2 Corinthians 9. There are 7 verses about biblical generosity in 2 Corinthians 9. I picked out one. It says, yes, you will be enriched in every way, so that you can be generous. And when you take your gifts to those who need them, they will thank God. You will be enriched in every way. Why will God bless you? So you can be a blessing and generous to others. Now listen to me. When you are generous, your time, your words, your encouragement, your love, your service, your finances, there will be people that you may never meet who will encounter God and give thanks to God because of your generosity. There will be people in Danville, in the South Side. There will be families and kids who will give God thanks this summer because you're generous. There will be middle school and high school students who will encounter the presence of God at summer camp because of your generosity. There will be 300 kids in a village in Nairobi, Kenya, whose parents live on $1.12 a day, who will encounter God because of your generosity. And listen, in 2 Corinthians 9, it tells us specifically what generous giving is. In 2 Corinthians 9, it says generous giving is done cheerfully and faithfully. It's done cheerfully and faithfully. Faithfully means this. It means every time I give, whatever I give, finances, time, words, when I give in faith. I give in faith knowing this. God always blesses obedience. God blesses obedience. So I give in faith, not so I can get a second house or another car or, a TV for every room and every bathroom in my house. I give faithfully because God blesses obedience, because when I give, he can entrust me to give back. So I give faithfully. Listen, and faithfully means regularly. I give in faith and I give faithfully. I don't just give once when I feel like it. I don't give when it's convenient. I don't give when it's comfortable. I give on a regular basis, and then I give cheerfully. Listen, when you give, whatever you give, don't give to Scott, don't give to Dan River Church. You give because of what God has given you. He's given you unconditional love and mercy and grace. He's given you life and salvation. You give cheerfully, not out of guilt, not out of manipulation, not out of reluctance. You give just because you want to be a blessing. Listen, I'll never forget one of my sons, when they were growing up, they loved dressing up in superhero costumes. I mean, loved it. Listen, by the way, it's May the 4th. Let me go ahead and say, May the 4th be with you. All right, there you go, all you Star Wars fans. And one of my sons loved dressing up as a Jedi Knight. He had the whole outfit with the lightsaber and everything. He had a Jedi Knight outfit. He had a Stormtrooper outfit. And he would wear it on a Tuesday afternoon. It didn't matter when it was. He had a motocross outfit that he wore. He had an Iron Man costume, a Spider-Man costume. But his favorite was a Batman costume that he got for his birthday. And it was a cool costume. It was awesome. And he got it for his birthday. And about a month later, our children's ministry was starting an 8-week kids curriculum on superheroes of the Bible. And we invited all the kids at church to wear your favorite superhero costume. And so he wore his Batman costume. He was so excited. We dropped him off at the kids' room, went to church. I forget if I was speaking that day or not. Came back to pick him up. He didn't have his Batman costume. I'm like, where's your costume? He said, Dad. There's this kid. His name is Johnny. And today was his very first day at church. And he didn't know it was superhero day. So I let him wear my costume. I said, that's awesome, son. But where's your costume? He said, Dad, I let him keep it. I said, what's his name? I think his name's Johnny. We didn't have no record of a Johnny. We had no clue. He just went on and there it was and never got the bat. Listen, and for several years after that, and even for a lot longer after that, he just said, if I see someone that has something that I have and they need it, I'll just give it to them. Growing up, I'm like, at some point, this after about 2 or 3 years, 6, 7, 8 years old, I came and said, son, why are you giving all your stuff away? You've got to stop. And he looked at me and said, Dad, why? And I said, I don't know. Because it don't make no sense. And he just gave. Just give. Remember, God's not against your stuff. He's against your stuff having you. The number 2 most talked about topic in all of the Bible is money, possessions, and generosity. Why? Listen, the only topic, 2,200 verses on money, finances, possessions. Why? The only topic talked about more is God's love for humanity. Because here it is with generosity. 2 things I'm going to pray for you. Generosity, as I've already said, generosity is always connected to your heart. Always. I've said it 100 times before. I'll say it 100 times more. God does not need your money. God needs your heart. That's why he talks about generosity. And the second reason why he talks about generosity is this. Because Jesus is never, ever, ever going to ask you to do something that he hasn't already set the example. He's never going to ask you to do something that he didn't. Listen, if there was one person who's ever lived in all humanity who deserved everything, it was Jesus. King of kings, Lord of lords, Messiah, Savior, Lord. He could have been the prince. He could have been the mighty soldier, the captain, the commander. And Jesus did not come to get stuff from people. He came to give his life for people. He came so that you and I could have life. Jesus was the ultimate example of generosity. So my question is this. Who's the leader? What do you want more of? Why do you want it? And what are you willing to do to get it? Let's not let greed be our master. Let's get rid of it. Let me pray for you. With your head bowed and eyes closed, I've asked our worship team to lead us in just a great song that I love. The song's called Made for More. And here's the deal. You're made for more. You're made for a different kingdom. You're made for a different purpose. You're made for a new life, new hope, New identity. You're not who you were. You're not what you did. Some of you, if you're being honest, you know, before you gave your life to Christ, greed was your master. But not anymore. Jesus is your master. He's your leader. He's your Lord. And so here's the deal. As we're singing, the altar is open. If you just want to come and give God thanks for his blessings and resources in your life, come and give God thanks. If there's someone you know who needs to experience the generosity of Jesus Christ, come and pray for them. We are made for a different kingdom. We are made for a different king, and we are made for a new purpose. Our past does not define us. Our past does not lead us. Jesus does. Lord, we are made for you. Let's stand. Let's worship. Let's respond.